Hello all, this is Görkem Güngör. Today I will present the past and present trends of consumption-based carbon dioxide emissions and emissions embodied in trade, which is chapter 2.3 of the IPCC 6 assessment report, working group 3. Now, when we look at the emissions from upstream or downstream, from upstream we have the production-based emissions, and these are from the burning of fossil fuels, which depends on the place of production. But we should also add to these emissions the international aviation shipping emissions, which are not concentrated in the place of production, and the non-resident activities, where the emissions are transported from one place production to the other place where it is consumed. But when we look at the downstream, the consumption-based emissions, these are irrespective of place of production. They include the trade balance of embodied emissions in goods and services, which depends on the lifestyle choices of consumers. And as cities are major hotspots for energy and climate policy, the footprint outside the administrative boundaries of the cities should also be taken into account. And the report chapter notes that there is no internationally agreed approach to calculate the consumption-based emissions for the moment. So it's still under debate. There are additional methods. These are the proposed accounting methods. The one on the top is the extraction-based emissions accounting, where the allocation of all emissions from fossil fuels are to the country of origin. And on the other side, we have the income-based emissions, where all the emissions are traced from fossil fuels to their capital and labor inputs of production. For global trade, I included the example of the Netherlands. Geographically, it's a small country. It mainly produces and exports agricultural goods, but it's an important country for global trade. Historically, since the 1700s, Netherlands has been trading with all over the world, and the main ability of the Netherlands is to add value to these imports. So nearly 465 million tons of cargo in the port of Rotterdam are processed annually. Globally, around 12 billion tons are transported annually, and the Netherlands contributes an important part of this global trade. We have also air transport, 3 million packages processed daily at Schiphol Airport. And the Netherlands is the main entry point for the European Union, where 1/3 of the European Union goods pass through the Netherlands. And the export amount is considerable, with a developing country reaching 750 billion euros annually. And there is a significant increase in both the goods and the services imports. This is an example graph from the Statistical Institute of the Netherlands, which includes the import value of goods and services from India to the Netherlands. In 2022, there's a considerable increase in the goods imports, but in 2023, there is also a considerable increase in the services imports. The difference between goods and services is that goods are tangible goods, which arrive at either the ports or the airports and goes through custom clearance, where services are not tangible, non-tangible goods, but they are invoiced as an import good. And exploring the India and surrounding countries' emission trajectories. This is only from transportation. We you can see that there is much more than 255 scenarios here. The majority of the scenarios converge below 1 gigaton carbon dioxide per year of emissions. This is only carbon dioxide emissions. The other gases are accounted separately. But you can see that depending on the pathway, it can be increasing or decreasing effect on the global carbon dioxide emissions. So there's still a lot of policies to be implemented so that this trajectory moves to a net zero pathway. These are from the report. There's there's a mixing of in the report between the consumer and producer countries. The producer countries are mainly large developing countries such as India and the surrounding region, China, Southeast Asia. But here in the section, we have for the production the example of the UK, Japan, and the Netherlands, where the section states that there is decoupling between production-based emissions and GDP. This might be the case, but this is not the situation for these countries. These countries are more responsible for consumption-based emissions and value adding to their imports, whereas large developing countries such as China and India, these are more responsible for production-based emissions, but the section define groups them under the consumption-based emission and decoupling, relative decoupling from the GDP, where in the following slides, I will describe for China in more detail the recent situation. The embodied emissions in trade. It is apparent that for developed countries, they tend to be net emission importers, which are located in downstream in global supply chains. And for export, the section states that China is shifting its exports to include more low carbon and higher value added goods and services. Actually, this is the assessment of China as a one single region, but China is also dispersed in sites. There are low resource and high resource regions. There are large urban centers and their neighborhoods, which I will describe in the following slides. And this is the article which I mentioned about China. This is a research on China's carbon footprint accounting based on a high precision carbon dioxide emission inventory. This is by using approximately 39 stations measuring the assimilated carbon dioxide, meaning the production minus the absorption, meaning that from the transition from inorganic carbon to organic carbon. So this is a net amount of carbon dioxide which is emitted to the atmosphere, and this is a calculated value actually. And this value is compared to the reporting to monitor, report, and verify the emissions of China and the subregions of China. The article groups the carbon footprint calculation in four main parts. The first one is the input-output method, where the article uses a multi-region input-output method for China. The life cycle assessment method is also mentioned as an important calculation method. The IPCC calculation method, this is based on tier 1 and tier 2 accounting, where the emissions are calculated by using emission factors. This can be from the input source, but also it can be from the secondary energy sources. And finally, the carbon footprint calculator. This study uses stations in 31 provinces, and the input-output table is for 42 sectors in China in 2021. And this uses a top-down approach for carbon assimilation to monitor and verify the reported emissions. And the initial findings of this study is that there is a transfer of emissions in China from low to high resource regions. Resource meaning capital and labor regions, where there's a flow from developing to more developed urban regions, transfer of emissions. But the emissions does not rest in these developed urban regions. They are again transferred to their neighboring provinces. So when we look at China as one region, we can see that there is a shift to high value added exports, but there is also a transfer of emissions from low to high resource regions and then to the neighboring provinces. This also assesses the responsibility sharing. Responsibility is not regional responsibility, it is responsibility between the producer and the consumer. For the production responsibility, the producers are electric and heat power sectors. The international trade separates these sectors from the places where they are consumed. But when we look from the consumption responsibility lens, the highest consumer section is the construction sector for the emissions. But the accounting stated that this is preferred in international negotiations. And the sharing of responsibilities is by using weights between the production responsibility and the consumption responsibility, so that the developed and the underdeveloped regions could share the responsibility of their emissions. And in conclusion, the developed nations in Western Europe and North America are typically net emission importers, as their emissions embodied in imports exceed their exports. There is a shift in China from low carbon and higher value added exports, which actually led to a 20% decline in its exported emissions. But there is also a spillover from the urban region. The emissions are transferred to their neighboring regions. And these are the references. The first one is the sixth assessment report scenario database, where I use the transport emission pathways for India plus region. The second one is the study on China and the accounting of carbon dioxide emissions. And the third and fourth ones are related to the international trade and the role of Netherlands and the import from India. I thank you very much for your attention.